Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thanks again to the ITB folks for putting together this, what promises to be a very interesting and insightful interview. So again, I'm Pete Comeau. I'm the managing director here at Phocuswright. And it's my pleasure to have beside me here virtually, Andy Owen Jones from BD4 Travel. So Andy and I go back a little ways. I think a lot of the topics that we'll be touching on today aren't necessarily new to the market, but I think there's a lot that we've seen throughout the pandemic, and as we anticipate recovery, that we can discuss, and probably some tailwinds on some of the data trends that we'll touch on as we see massive kind of migration from consumers really across all categories into digital channels, and how that benefits Andy's company as well as trends that we see across the market. So Andy, it's a pleasure to be alongside you here.
Likewise.
So before we dig in to BD4 Travel and some of the things that you're doing, I wanted to reflect back on some of the trends that Chiruta touched on earlier today in the presentation that she delivered around some of the big macro trends that are impacting the market today. So digitization is one that I think we probably all can align on right now. So as we've all been kind of managing various forms of lockdowns and quarantines, depending upon where we're at in the world, we were forced onto digital channels, right? To order games and puzzles to keep us busy during the pandemic, and also to order, on-demand food, Just Eat and Uber Eats and other, on-demand food delivery services. So there really has been a big kind of force of consumers towards digital channels. So, we anticipate that once travel picks back up again, that consumers aren't going to forget kind of those I suppose changed behaviors. So interested to kind of get your perspective on that. Are you seeing that through your data sets? And also, what are some perspectives you have on kind of that digital transformation that we've seen over the last 9 to 12 months?
Yeah, very much so, Pete. I think many people have written that it's been between 5 and 10 years advance in digitalization, but I think it's a funny time. So what we've seen, for example, is a lot more people browsing for things on desktop when previously people were really trending onto the mobile. And I think in the pandemic, people aren't traveling so much, so they have more time behind a desktop to look for holidays and to look for flights, with a couple of different market exceptions. So talking through and looking at some of the data sets, we've seen desktop grow for flight bookings and flight searches, except in some of the Middle Eastern countries where the mobile has really kept growing faster and faster and faster. But I think it's undoubted that the trend towards doing things online has just accelerated. There's no question about that. And we see people are either investing in their future digital processes and cutting out some of the previous things. It's carrying on though. It's on the rise.
So on that last point, and also as we think about the next trend that Chiruta presented, which was artificial intelligence, hype or reality, and I think I kind of know where you stand on this topic, but to your point, are you seeing a lot more experimentation of technologies as certainly staffing has been impacted in a pretty severe way across certainly supplier categories, hotels, airlines, but really across the entire ecosystem. So in some ways, there's less people to kind of execute on some of these pilots, but from the time perspective, companies do have a little bit of time because they don't have kind of the massive travelers that they've had in the past. So have you seen more interest in engaging in pilots, and kind of what's your perspective on where artificial intelligence sits, because it's really been a trend that we've been talking about for quite some time, and we'll get to that a little bit further in the discussion, but kind of interested to hear your thoughts on where we're at in that trend curve.
To be very frank, it's very mixed. So there are still a lot of companies who don't have many people back in the office, particularly in Europe. A lot of the good implementation people simply aren't there. They're on short-time work, they're on furlough. So while they would like to try things, even some of the guys to implement stuff simply haven't been around. Having said that, There are a number of players who are really in a position where they can invest in the future, who've got either deeper pockets or richer parents. And yes, we're seeing some pretty big projects coming through for people who want to understand their clients. And in particular, people who've had lots of historical data and who've invested in data lakes of customer trends and so on, they find that's not so useful for predicting what's going to come next. And I think you've got two things that are intertwining. One is real-time interpretation of what's going on, as opposed to post hoc understanding of trends has become very, very important. And secondly, the long-term trend of people costs tend to go up, whereas IT costs tend to come down over time, mean that inevitably people are investing in more automation. And automation in the sense of artificial intelligence. But I think the most interesting thing that we've discovered over the last 18 months is getting the balance right between understanding corporate knowledge and what I'd say the corporate understanding and rule book and wisdom, and the automatic black box type stuff is critical. People don't really want black box AI. They want to reconcile the corporate wisdom with what the AI can bring, and in a sense, get the AI to do the heavy lifting, but they don't want to lose control.
So let's journey back a little bit to 2000. I think it was 2012, 2013 when you and Ibrahim and Melanie founded BD4 Travel. So what was the initial problem that you were trying to solve in the market, and where have we come from there? Or are you still razor focused on solving the same problem that you noticed in the marketplace back then?
I think we're focused on the same problem, but with a slightly different perspective. So we all came together in a company called Traveltainment, or the Amadeus Leisure Group. So we ran basically pretty much all the websites across Central Europe. And what we saw was a huge amount of product and a huge focus on pushing people through a funnel. And it was our contention that no one really was interested in the people who were looking but not buying. And that really only profited the search companies. It didn't profit the people who were trying to sell things. But most of our clients didn't understand what was going on their sites. They knew what was coming through the funnel. But if someone started looking for a villa in Mallorca and ended up buying a package holiday in Greece, some process happened. But A, I would say no one really knew it. And secondly, no one was really interested. So it was at ITB in 2013, we turned up with a PowerPoint presentation. And we went to see 4 different companies, 4 quite large companies, and said, we don't really think you understand your customers. And we think if you had an idea that this person was interested in that, and this person had this experience, and you could change your site, then you would do better than by treating them all as an average. And one of them was Expedia Germany, and they were great. Andreas, who ran Expedia Germany, basically said, yep, I think that's true. So they let us put a tracking pixel on their site for a year and model their customers in order to deliver to them a new look at how people were surfing on their site and interacting. So we started off trying to profile customers and understand what we would do with that. Out of that, we thought, the first thing we can do is just give people these profiles. If we can show you 100,000 profiles, do something with it. But what we discovered was it was very hard to change the site in real time to make something happen. So while we started with that idea of profiling, we ended up having to build recommendations and sort orders and these things. But we're now back in a similar situation where we see actually we want to keep the profile as the single biggest thing because people have invested in experimentation frameworks and so on. But I guess the most interesting evolution that we've seen is while everyone has tried to do personalization, what they've been measuring is averages. And so they test variant A and variant B. Variant B wins, so they make the site the same for everyone. And that by definition makes it more and more suitable for the average user.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I think back in 2012, we published a piece of research called Behavioral Targeting Marketing 101 meets Web 2.0, which was really all about personalization. And we talked about how companies must identify specific audiences and present them with specific and individual relevant promotions and content. So very similar to what you're talking about. Yep. Is really narrowing that down to that kind of single user. And, I think you presented on our stage back in 2014, right? And presented this concept and was, one of our winners. I think the Brand USA award was awarded to you. And so we've been talking about personalization for quite some time. Why has it taken so much time in the market to reach maybe an inflection point, which I sense is where we might be at today?
I think it was a number of things. Firstly, people have embedded teams. So we went to one very large client and they said, yes, but our team can do it at a similar level to your team by picking recommendations. And that's absolutely true. However, at the time, that team could only make certain learning experiences. And it took them a long time to understand that our system could learn with every single interaction, whether it was a booking or not. Whereas a team has only got maybe 5 or 6 learning experiences a week or a month. You can learn literally hundreds of thousands of times. So I think there was a bit of personnel issues in there. I think in a way, to really measure success of personalization, you've got to develop a whole new metric set. If you just measure averages, you'll only ever measure how close to the best average site you've got. And so you've got to come up with a new way of measuring, and that's intellectually pretty challenging. And no one wants to do that. And the entire e-commerce infrastructure is set up to measure averages or segments. If you're going to measure personalization, you've got to have a complete intellectual breakthrough as to how to measure what's different for everyone. And measuring the value of an audience is different to measuring the value of established customers. And then I'd say people have got used to the idea of AI and are seeing it works. And when we didn't have a proven use case, it was very hard to sell the concept. The more use cases you've got, the more interesting it is. And I think lastly, people have really tried and spent a lot of money on stuff, and some of it works well. But what we've seen a lot of the time is if you put in something which relies on lots of offsite analysis of what's going on, it's simply too slow to address someone's need in real time. And so as technology's got faster, as we've been through, I think we've been through about 35 implementations now. You make mistakes, you learn, and it becomes easier. And I'd say we've now got a corpus of wisdom about what works and what doesn't that we simply didn't have 5 years ago. And so you can go in and talk about someone's business needs without just focusing on, here's my shiny AI. And I think we were a bit too focused on, here's my shiny AI. And now it's, okay, so you want to reach this person now and give them a voucher without training them to expect a voucher. And you only want to give it to people who would be responsive to a voucher so that you don't pollute your site. And you want to cross-sell these things in an intelligent way. Okay, let's deal with that problem, as opposed to AI, here comes the AI, let's do something with the AI. And I think we were a bit guilty of that to begin with.
Yeah. So shifting a little bit to data. So data, obviously we're in the middle of a data talk stream. And maybe this speaks to some of your last points about travel companies starting to really embrace that concept. And in the past, they've, what we're talking about, travelers taking 1 to 2 trips a year, not in the last 12 months, but historically, right? And maybe they've, travel companies have relied on that data set, presenting offers which aren't, contextually relevant, and that presents some challenges in delivering really relevant results and personalized results. So can you speak a little bit to that? And also, the other thing about AI and deep learning models is they really do require a lot of data, and first party data is really key to that. But also there's lots of other data sets that put behavior into context. So can you kind of touch on, as you're talking to a client, how do you kind of strip down this discussion into something that's meaningful to them? And also explain how you're really kind of presenting these relevant results on an individual basis.
And I think that comes a bit back to what you measure. So if you're only measuring what comes through at the end of the funnel, as well as some of the conversion steps, you're not looking at the interaction of people with your product. And a lot of the biggest investors in the travel market have only really been able to see behind the API, and customers have historically held onto their own data above the API. So the user interaction, but they've not really done that much with it. So what we're tending to do is be able to look across multiple sites and to train data on multiple sets of data without passing data over. Everyone's afraid that if I'm letting you process my data, I'm going to give that data to someone else, which is why third-party cookies are really disappearing and they're going out of fashion. But if you can use that data to train data sets and then apply it specifically to your context, I think we've trained our data on 1.1 billion customer journeys now, or whatever. If someone comes to your site or comes to work with our tools and they've only got 20 million users a year, we can still have algorithms that are trained on over 1 billion people, but then we can tune it down to their specific needs because everyone's a bit different. And the challenge comes when your strategy, your product, your approach is the same as everyone else's. Why should I, as a customer, come to your site? But if you're really trying to understand what's unique about my portfolio, I'm trying to surface some interesting product for people. I'm not only using the best sellers, but I'm trying to understand what is it about that product and this product that would meet the needs of this individual. Then you have to really take care of the process to get there. And we've discovered in our clients over the last year, we've found some wonderful people. There's a woman we work with in Emirates called Artie. Hope she won't mind me saying it. She's fantastic because we set the AI going, it profiles people, we put use cases in, and she drills right down to the level of checking out all the individuals in the first use cases to see that the AI is coming up with sensible results. And then we tune it, we change it, we chop and change it. But you've got that institutional wisdom coming in at the micro level to test the data. You find all the problems. It's really hard work, but then you sit back and let the algorithm churn its way through, and you just see better and better results over time. So I'd say it's a delicate balance between masses of information which you need, and clearly we haven't had masses of booking data in the last months, but we've had masses of search data. And so what you can see is trends start to form, inflection points happen, and that alerts you to something. But then you need the corporate wisdom to come through from your client to say, so actually, we've seen this kind of thing before. This is how we interpret it.
Yeah, and on that last point, we've seen consumer behavior obviously change quite significantly in the last year. Longer search windows, shorter booking windows. Are you kind of at a lack of data from the booking side, and does that impact your algorithms? Do you have to retrain your AI to kind of focus on this new environment? And then what do you think? Are you seeing data that suggests, a permanent change in consumer behavior? I think that would be useful for the audience to understand.
We don't know yet in terms of how permanent this is. I think some more macro factors like Brexit, for example, 10% of the population of London doesn't live in London anymore. That's bound to have an impact on the flights to and from a city like London. Similar with San Francisco, I think. Not Brexit related, I hope, but you never know. I think what we've seen is that patterns have changed, and we're trying to take advantage of that. As you say, booking windows are much shorter, but typically content upload and the way people manage sites haven't changed that much. So what we're encouraging our clients to do is get more flexible in the content they upload and have more places where the AI can pick out what products or content to put in front of people, not just bookable content, but rich content. How things change is really quick, and you need to be able to have algorithms that learn really quickly. So we're getting into much more defined contributions and linking that to flexible websites.
Great. So we've got a little less than a minute left. So I'll ask you to, we've got a fairly broad audience, as we always do here at ITB, but if you had one piece of advice that you would share relative to data or personalization, what would that be to this, again, fairly broad audience?
I guess it would be what you measure is what you get. And are you measuring people or are you measuring averages? Because if you're only measuring averages, you'll only be able to deal with large sectors and find the best average person for your site. And I think that won't cut it.
Perfect. I think that's a good statement to end on. So Andy, Owen Jones, thank you very much. Enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you, Pete. Take care.